Hi there. Welcome back to Invisible Innocence. I am your host, Meghan Moret. Thanks for coming back and listening to part 2 with Meghan Connors. She is an awesome survivor advocate, educator. In the previous episode, we talked about so many different things, but what we really talked about are just some of the vulnerabilities, who can become a victim, what happens, and how does a trafficker gain control, and then what happens when a victim tries to leave. We kind of just touched a little bit on that, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. But as you and I have been talking, we have been realizing that there are just some major gaps in our system. You know, and we didn't talk about this, but I think one thing that is really important for people to realize and to think about is the difference between someone that's being trafficked and a sex worker, a prostitute, because as you and I did talk about in the previous episode, it can look like it's this agreed upon deal. It can look glamorous even. It can look like you're living the high life. And like you said, a lot of what happens is someone starts to think, well, I mean, I'm going to get paid, so why wouldn't I do it? Quick fix, quick way to pay the electric bill, quick way to buy diapers for my kids, or to pay rent. So all of a sudden now you're in this tornado of what's next and just trying to survive. And I just want to make sure that people understand, well, I truly don't believe that anyone in either of those three things that I just mentioned, sex worker, prostitute, trafficking victim, whatever it is that you want to call it or identify people as, I don't believe that any person wants that to be their goal in life. No little girl thinks about when they grow up what they want to do, or boy, what they want to do, when they grow up it's to not do that. It's, to be a ballerina or an astronaut or a fireman or whatever it is. And so will you just touch just a little bit on that, just to make clear what the difference is between being trafficked, being a sex worker, the differences between
absolutely.
those, and how they can intertwine as well.
Yeah, I think that they can intertwine, and people will use a lot of different terminologies for their situation, and the terminology that somebody may use for their situation today versus the same situation in 5 months might change, right? Most people that you're going to interact with, especially adults, but also with kids, are going to say that they are doing it on their own, that they do not have a pimp, they are not being trafficked. Absolutely not. They're choosing it. This is what they want, all of these things. Or I'm in sex work and I have the right to be empowered and independent. And we talked about that empowerment, how the brain sometimes tries to work out situations that may not be ideal. Because sure, you might feel empowered doing that and empowered and in control of your body, but most sex buyers are buying because they have a sexual paraphilia, gratification that they would not act out on somebody they love, usually something violent. So we see strangulation, we see wanting a child, we see wanting same sex, we see all of these things that happen, right? And people can choose what they do as long as it's consensual and it's legal, right? But we see these things happen, and I would say, is it empowerment if you don't know when you walk into this hotel room if he's going to choke you out, right? That becomes very difficult. And yes, I think we have to tell ourselves, but I got out of it, but I did it, right? Because it's that survival. That's the more survivable belief. I think what becomes difficult is that it looks like choice almost all of the time, right? And some of that goes to it being a business, right? So trafficking is a business. I think when we talk about sexual predators, we're talking about people that are addicted to pornography and they have this gratification that they're trying to get and all of these things, right? And with traffickers, this is usually about money. This is usually about money. Sometimes it's about, if with familial trafficking, you might see generational trauma or addiction or different things, but ultimately it goes to money and resources.
Not to interrupt you, but at one of the trainings that I attended for law enforcement that you were at, it was either you or Dan talked about the cost, the average
Yes.
income that a pimp makes off of a trafficking victim per year. And what is that number?
It's about $200,000.
So,
and it's pretty easy to do. I mean, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children just did a study that showed it only takes 8 minutes to build a rapport with somebody online. An unhoused minor who has run away or is rebelling is trying to get out of the foster care system or whatever, 1 in 4 will be with or will make contact with a trafficker within 48 hours, and they don't come up to you and say, "Hi, I'm a trafficker. Would you like to work for me?" That's not how that works, right? But I think that goes back to it of, let's say you do go into sex work independently. How long are you going to be able to do that before you need somebody to care if you come home at night? You need somebody to support you and help vet your buyers, or just to emotionally be there. And so it's not going to look like your trafficker. It's going to look like your boyfriend. And I think going back to that money piece, that's where we talk about things like abduction being rare, right? Because if I'm a trafficker and I'm a business person, right, you're worth $200,000 a year to me on average. Why would I abduct you from a Target when you're going to fight or flight me the whole time? We have no relationship, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to notice you don't come home probably, because I don't know what your life is if you live alone or if you're close with your family. Somebody will probably notice. It will probably go in the media in a lot of places, right? And I'm going to have to keep you pretty sedated the whole time, because you're constantly going to try to run on me. And most sex buyers don't want to purchase that, right? And so why would I do that if I can get a 15-year-old to meet me at Starbucks because she's mad at her mom, and then I meet her and I validate her and I buy her something that mom would buy her, and then we meet again, or whatever the situation is, right? And then she doesn't come home, and mom calls and she says, "Hey, I think my daughter's run away. She was at the Starbucks," all these things. And the police go and they care, right? And they look at the cameras and it's, well, she walked out willingly. We have very limited resources. We're very understaffed. We're overwhelmed. We care, but she'll come back. And she'll feel like, well, I chose to go with him. And now I am, I'm involved in all of this stuff, and nobody else understands me, and the adrenaline. And a lot of compulsive relationships, what happens is they mistake intensity for intimacy. Those things get very, very crossed. So the adrenaline of the game, of the making the dates with the sex buyers, and of the addiction piece, and of the robbing people, and of all the things that can happen, right? And don't have to happen, but can happen, absolutely. That can go to the intensity of a relationship and make trauma bonds really, really deep.
Yeah. And just to reiterate and to say that again, so it takes about an 8-minute time period to build a rapport with someone, to suck someone in. Then they become a $200,000 ticket for them per year. So that's it, 8 minutes, and then you become $200,000. And usually you're not the only one. Usually these traffickers have multiples, and usually they have the victims also going out and recruiting for them. So it's just the system. So that is why this industry is second to the illegal drug industry. That's why this is a $150 billion a year just business, if you want to call it that. But unfortunately, it is. It is supply and demand. And it is because people want this, that it has become this huge. And, what you were saying, just a couple of minutes ago about, if I go into this hotel room, is this guy going to strangle me? Is he going to choke me? Is he going to kill me? Am I going to get out alive? And then when you leave, there's that sigh of, okay, relief, satisfaction, gratification. I did it though. I did it. Look at me. And that
I'm not
is
vulnerable.
Right. And that's when it becomes part of the game. It's just a game. It's a game of survival. It's a game of, am I going to be able to do it again? Am I going to be able to turn this trick and not be hurt by him, or not be hurt by my trafficker? Or it's just a constant game. Not to mention, you said, sedation. Many victims are kept in some sort of sedative state so that the trafficker can, maintain control over them.
Absolutely. And whether, there was an addiction piece that brought them into that situation, or whether, I mean, I don't really know very many people that can be in the game that don't need to take the edge off in some way, right? And then it becomes very difficult because even when we talk about resources and programs, and most programs, when I receive a trafficking victim, most programs will say that that victim has to be sober for 30 days. So what do I do with that, right? And how do we meet that gap? And so there's a lot of things that happen.
And that's part of where the receiving and the resources and what we would like to start seeing happen in this industry, because it's great for people to go. It's great for me to go and advocate and be there for someone. In my case, it's mostly kids. Be there for them and help them get the resources, and to be empathetic towards them. It's another thing for you to go out and to educate law enforcement and the medical field on how to identify, what to look for, the questions to ask, so on and so forth. But then the question is, then what? And so that's only going to get us so far. And then there's the other half that needs to start happening. And, we've had conversations about that. And I want to know from you, what do you feel like, first and foremost, after educating law enforcement, what do you feel like needs to happen?
Well, first, I think the education does start first, right? Because the reason that drug, that industry is so profitable, and now we're seeing trafficking come up, is because law enforcement has been very well trained on how to interdict drugs, and to traffic drugs, you have to have a contact at the border, you have to have all of these things. You're gonna lose some. Law enforcement is not currently trained on how to respond to trafficking, because the part of, well, there's a whole neurobiology to it, but the part of your brain when you are in fight or flight, so when law enforcement comes to a victim and what they're expecting is that they're going to go to jail, or they're going to take their services or their man away, or they're going to be brought into services that have failed them in the past, or that maybe they're there to buy sex, because any occupation buys sex, right? All of these things. When you're in fight or flight, the part of your brain that controls empathy, rational thought, impulse control, play, goes totally offline to survive. So when you're yelling in somebody's face, right? And then typically what we do is say, well, she's combative, she's going to jail. Yeah. And we perpetuate the cycle. So it starts with that first. And then I think it goes into understanding the human behavior. So you have to understand the trauma bond a little bit more. We can know that trafficking is horrible, right? And I have to try not to vilify that relationship in my connection with them, because I will only create division.
Yes,
distance. So I was working with a 12-year-old one time, and she had been pretty badly beaten by her adult trafficking, what she called her boyfriend. And we were discussing this, and she was talking about how incredibly thoughtful, how mad thoughtful he was, right? And we had this conversation, and I wanted to say, your face is not like mad thoughtful, right? I didn't. I think I said, it's really great that you found somebody that cares about you. We all need and deserve that in life. And so what does he do that shows you that he's really thoughtful, right? That's awesome. I'm looking for people that are thoughtful too in my life. Right. Wonderful, right?
Yeah, of course.
Tell me more without saying tell me more, right? There are things that you can do to help get coping skills without feeling patronizing, right? And so she told me actually a really horrific story, which many times they'll tell you horrific stories as if they're good, right? Because that's in the context, right? And then she told me about how he brought her a snack because they were her favorite things after. In her 12 years of life, she had never had anybody else know what her favorite things would be. She'd grown up in the system. She had been running away over and over and over. She'd gone to juvie for a little bit at already 12 years old. And then she was on the run, and then she's a bad kid, and now she's a throwaway kid. And we're going to invest in the kids that are going to succeed, right? We want to have good numbers and good data, and so we can have more donations so we can help more people. And she just got lost. And so to her, somebody that would know what would bring her comfort after a really horrible day, that was the best thing she ever knew. And that can break my heart.
It's just the small things.
Yeah, that can break my heart. But it's also, again, all behaviors make sense. I think there's so many things, even, you and I have talked about kind of like why victims blame themselves, right? So why I get a bunch of different questions. How can she be a victim if she drives herself? So clearly she has choice. So my answer to that would be, well, she makes decisions based on what gets me the least assaulted, not no assault, maybe everything's good. So if my options, right, and the part of my brain that can think about options can't be online while I'm surviving, if my options are I'm going to go and I'm going to turn 10 tricks or meet with these sex buyers or whatever else, however you want to phrase it, and I'm going to make my money and I'm going to come home and my man and I are going to hang out, or I'm going to come home and I am going to get a beating and maybe to the point of death because I'm no longer profitable, or I might be traded up to somebody else, or he's not going to vet my buyers or whatever else, I will drive myself to the hotel every time. And I'm so very much a victim. And I'll feel like I chose it because then we go to what I call the grilled cheese, right? The grilled cheese is, let's say that I have a physically abusive partner. I don't. For everybody listening, we're good. But let's say I did, right? So I have a physically abusive partner, and after dinner tonight, he beats me, right? I know as an advocate and as a person that has done a lot of healing, right, that he abused me because he's an abuser. Now, if I can make it that he abused me because I burnt a grilled cheese sandwich, I have more control. What's a more survivable belief?
Exactly.
This person that I have love and attachment to and maybe kids with and a home with and maybe debt with and maybe all of these things, and maybe I'm home with the kids and he's the only one working, and that I don't know when he's going to explode on me, and I don't know what's going to happen, and if I leave, will I have to go to a domestic violence shelter, and will he get the kids, and will I have income, and will people understand me, or will they blame me? And because all of those things, or I did X which caused Y, and if I never do X again, I can prevent Y. We don't tend to blame the traffickers or the abusers because we're so busy blaming ourselves to make it survivable.
That's right.
And the narrative gets messy, right? So I know you guys talked to Dan Nash, who's a colleague of mine, and we train law enforcement together. He and I like to talk about that. Let's say Dan, we're very different people. We get along really well, but we're very different, right? Dan and I can go through a tornado together. And I can tell you all day long about what that experience was like, right? But to do that, I have to go back and re-experience it. I have to come up with language, which is really hard to do with trauma. I have to go back and think through, did I scream? Did the window break? How did I respond? What order did it happen? And the brain jumbles it. I don't have to do any of that with Dan because he was there.
Right.
And Dan will actually be able to tell me what my experience was. He will narrate it for me. And that gaslighting. And we see all of these trauma bonds of nobody knows me. I don't even know me. When I feel safe, I'm unsafe. I feel so vulnerable. I thought I wasn't vulnerable. Now you've said I am, and I can't unlearn that. It's so uncomfortable. And then we gotta do services.
Or they know me better than I do.
Yeah.
And that's another thought process that can happen too.
I mean, even up until maybe even a year ago, I had some times where I would be like, what would he want me to do right now? And
Really?
then I would be like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to do either. But, and sometimes, you know.
Because you were so used to that train of thought. You were so used to wondering what was going to satisfy, gratify, and please that
what would
person.
keep me the safest? And then again, I think in my personal experience, it's that path of least assaults, and we need somebody. So I really vilified the sex buyers, and I felt that my trafficker was a bit of a protector in that. You know, it took a lot of time for my brain to be like, well, I might not have been with them if it wasn't for this, right?
Yeah.
It's a long process, and I think, you know, we can talk about the gaps in services, and I think that the healing journey really has so many areas to it, but there are a couple basic steps that are starting points for people.
You know, you were just talking about your choices, and you're like, okay, so do I do this and maybe just get beat up a little bit, or do I do this and get beat up and assaulted a whole lot? So then all of a sudden, your normal becomes your normal becomes your normal, but you know, from out here looking in, it's just chaos and just volatility and just so abnormal. But when you're in it and you're living it, it all becomes relative.
And I think that goes back to the worthy victim conversation we had on the last episode, right? Because I think there's so many are like, well, she was a victim, but now she's recruiting others, so she's become the trafficker. Or now she's doing this. But she's done some other crimes and all of those things. And most of that is path that leads to assault. If I am managing the other girls in my group, right? They call it a different term in the life. But if I'm managing all of the girls, I'm making sure the ads get posted, I'm doing all of these things. Maybe instead of having to turn or have sex with 5 men tonight, I have to have sex with 3. Right? It's path of least assault. Let's say my trafficker says, hey, your quota, the amount of money you have to bring me is $800 tonight, right? We'll just throw out a random number. You can either go and find all these dates and meet with them and do all of these things, or you can take these stolen credit cards and you can go do this, or you can go rob a Target, or you can go rob a sex buyer, or you can do all of those things. Most people would choose that. And it's path of least assault. It's not because these are such corrupt, moralists, just totally horrific people. Most of the time they got into this because they're really empathetic and they connect with people, and attachment and loyalty is important to them, and their values have been preyed upon.
Right.
And now they feel like they're the criminal and there's nowhere to go.
And most of the girls that I know have had criminal activity. And as you said, it's not by choice. It's survival. And unfortunately, whether it's, getting something for themselves, that the trafficker's taken all of their money, which they normally do. You're not left with a penny in many cases. And let's just say you need to go and, I don't know, get feminine products or soap or whatever it is. All of a sudden that becomes normal too. Oh, I got away with it. It worked for me. And then you get into this cycle. And so many times the end, or the, let's say, temporary, the temporary stopping of their victimization, because many times they end up going back, which is another hard part of the healing process. But they have been arrested for a crime or drugs, or there's just so many things. And so then again, you have people looking at these victims as they're criminal. Look, she shouldn't have been doing that. She shouldn't have been doing that either. But you get into that cycle, and then that just becomes survival. It becomes your norm. It becomes the path of least resistance. If I don't do this, if I don't steal this for him or for me, what's the lesser of two evils? Right. And so it just becomes this horrible cycle that is almost impossible to end. And so many of the girls that I come in contact with, it's either juvenile detention, or you have to agree to let us help you and get some restoration and get some healing. Right. And man, is that a hard decision, even for a 12-year-old to make, or an 18-year-old girl to make, because it's easier to not, as you said, it's easier to not be in that path of healing and restoration, because it takes work. It takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes a ton of trust, because how am I going to trust these people that are telling me that they're going to help me be okay when this is all I've known?
And how do I trust that? Who are you to tell me that you know what my life is, or all of these things? And I think sometimes we approach it like, do you have a place to stay? Do you have food? And it can almost become like offensive of like, yeah, I do. Like, like I'm not this vulnerable.
Look at me.
Like
I'm
great,
better dressed
right?
than you are. What do you mean? Do I have something to eat?
Who are you to tell me, all of these things? And that trust of do you know my situation? Like, will you understand what I do? And sometimes that self-sabotage piece too of like, maybe I do feel safe in this relationship with an advocate, and they're going to leave, so I'm going to leave first, right? We see these things happen all the time. And again, it's just trauma happens in relationships, healing happens in relationships. Everything we do is relational, and it's all communication. Yeah. And we just have to have that. But when you come in and you're like, hey, you can take my services, or this is what it is, that is hard to say, yeah, you might actually know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Because historically people haven't. And sometimes they've caused harm. I mean, you can have wonderful intentions and sometimes horrible impacts.
Yeah.
because you think that you're looking for the kid chained to a radiator in a basement or in a boxcar,
Yes.
and then you get this 12-year-old girl in juvenile detention who is, smoking and drinking and wanting to do all this stuff and running away and cussing you out. And
Yeah.
are you still going to show up the same? You know?
Well, and when you do meet someone, especially a young person, that's living that life, you are forever changed.
Right.
And I think that that's what is so endearing to me when I'm doing this work, is that they teach me so much. And like you said, like, I'm only an expert in my life. And actually, I'm not even going to say that.
Right, I'm still working on
Because
it.
if you're going to call me an expert at anything, it would just be, I'd have to just take responsibility for myself. But I learned so much, and I just so much about just what it is to be human, and the flaws that each of us have, and the different upbringings and the different circumstances and things like that. But the best and most beautiful part about it is when you do see someone start to make that change, and when they do take that leap, because it's like jumping off. I'm not even going to hide it. Worse than a high dive. I mean, for me, it'd be like, scuba diving with sharks.
Right.
It just your biggest fear, the unknown. What's going to happen? Am I going to get hurt? Can I breathe? And so, I don't think that either one of us are going to be able to solve all of the problems and the loopholes. But I think that it is just so important to keep educating and to keep letting people know. And the biggest part for me is to be proactive instead of reactive. And that's my biggest goal. People ask me all the time, why do you do this? Why do you do this? How can you be around these children that have been exploited and abused and trafficked or just in the foster care system? How can you do it? And I really don't know, but what I don't want to happen, and if I had one wish in the world, it would be to never have let those people or children ever be in that situation. And so much of this is avoidable. And I think that that's why we're both just trying to do our part. And again, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And we've talked about familial trafficking before. And so I think that most of us that grew up in a typical home, you would never think in a million years that these kinds of things would be happening in a home, because that's your safe place. That's where your mom and dad are. That's where your dog, Blondie lives. Everything's just great, and it's not. And so it's really important to, like you said, if it looks a little bit off and it seems like something's not right, maybe it's not. And that's okay to think that, because these types of things happen in all sorts of different environments, different places, socioeconomic groups, geographical, demographical. I mean, it does not matter. It's happening everywhere, unfortunately. And so, if we can get law enforcement trained, which is what your big job is right now. And how many would you say you guys are training a week now? I mean, it's just, you guys are just, literally, her and the human trafficking training center, they are everywhere. Like, every time I talk to any of them, they are moving from here to here, state to state, flying here, flying there. So yeah, how many thousands of officers?
We're busy. I don't have the exact number right now, but I think we're just over 6,000 officers this year so far.
Unbelievable.
And that they have gone out and found, Dan would have the exact right number, right? I think he shared it, but they found hundreds of victims right after, some like within hours of the training, right? And some of that, again, is we give them the skills, because they need to know, right? They need more than see something, say something, right? If we can't say, if you see something, call 911. If you are 911, that's not going to help you very much, right?
That's
so
right.
we need to give them the skills and the tools to do that. But we also have to really empower them to kind of let their own guard down and enter into that connection, right? I'm obviously not a law enforcement officer, but as an advocate, I need to do everything not to my survivor or for my survivor, but with my survivor, right? Because I don't want to create some codependency or I don't want to create something where they don't feel empowered in themselves, where they just feel really broken and you know, they don't feel like they can have a life moving forward, right? I want to instill in them that you've kept yourself alive this long. Like, you're actually really, really smart. And so, you know, it's a privilege to walk with people in trauma. Doesn't always feel that way, right?
Yeah.
But just to know that and to do that relationship. And so we teach law enforcement that. And then now my other main area is really trying to teach advocates. And not that I know everything, right? I have as much to learn as anybody else, but kind of looking at here's some of the pitfalls that we need to fix. And then how do you build that rapport? Like, how do you connect with somebody? How do you do that attachment stuff? What's happening in their brain, right? What are some workarounds? Because we need each other. It has to be a team.
And most of us advocates have had training and you have to have certain classes and certifications in human psychology, human behavior, trauma, trauma bonding, what happens even, you know, in utero, or even as a child, you know, that's 2 years old, how that can affect them for the rest of their lives. So you get this basic understanding of human development in the human mind. But what I have learned is that each person has such a unique story that every time I meet someone new, it's like learning everything all over again and having to remind yourself what happened. Like, what happened, not just physically to them, not just to their shell, but to their mind, to their spirit, to everything. And then how to proceed and how to be the best advocate for them. And so many people too are so afraid of even talking about sex trafficking or bringing it up, or, oh my gosh, it couldn't be. It would never be, you know, trafficking. That girl could never have been trafficked, or that boy could never have been trafficked. And there's just so many, you know, taboos that are connected to it. And I think that we need to get over that. And like you said, just be comfortable enough to just maybe start engaging and having the conversations and being okay with it. And especially for advocates. I mean, it's one thing to train law enforcement, but I know several advocates that still, they're just like, I think I'll just sit here and wait until they disclose, and which part of that is correct, but you're never gonna get a disclosure unless you're building that rapport, and you knowing without saying out loud, something's happening, and something's not right, and we need to do whatever we need to do as long as it takes. And that's the other hard part too, is that, you know, we're humans, and we're used to instant gratification and things happening in the snap of our fingers. And you watch me, I'm gonna go save this child. I'm gonna get her to tell me everything that's happened. We're gonna put her here. We're gonna get her this therapy and this counseling and all this, and it's gonna be great. And in 5 years, she's gonna be graduating from high school and she's gonna grow up. It doesn't work like that. And you have to be willing to put the time in and be patient. But it's a beautiful thing when you do start to see those things happen and change for these individuals.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm here for best case scenario, which ebbs and flows, not success or failure or whatever else, right? I mean, it really changes all the time. And I think so many times we build that relationship because we're going to get that disclosure, and then we get it and we're like, oh, we got the disclosure, and then we take total control away, and now we're like, I've got the disclosure, I'm going to run with it, and I'm going to prosecute, and I'm going to do all these things. And where's that victim left now?
Yeah.
Right? With the worst, she's come to this realization, you know, and I think, and also not having the conversations, like you said, because we're afraid of it. Really, some of that is the traffickers doing that. They groom the environment as much as they groom the victim. And if they can get the environment to think this is only in third world countries, this is only in rural areas, this is only at the Super Bowl, this is only in big cities, this couldn't be somebody else. This person is on drugs and paranoid and hallucinating, right? I give law enforcement the example of, he has to put a camera in my car one time. and I come home and he knows something that I said or did or where I went, for me to always wonder if there's a camera in my car.
Right.
And then you pull me over and I'm really, really anxious and I'm really tired and maybe I'm coming off of substances or something. And I say, I can't talk to you because there's a camera in my car. And you pull me back to your squad car and you look and there's no camera and I'm paranoid and hallucinating, right? And it was all manifested that way. It was intentional, right? It's so easy. And we have to look at people for who they were. We don't know what they've been through, right? Where they're at now, and just kind of that partnership of, I'm not actively in trauma, so I've got some options, and let's hit this together, right? And then also where they could be. You know, I look at pictures side by side of just a year difference in my life, and you would never think that it was the same person.
Yeah. So if there was anything about trafficking that you would want people to know, whether it's the victim side of things, whether it's the advocate side of things, whether it's the prosecution side of things, what would it be? What is the message? You know, if you had one just solid message that you wanted people to know about this, what would you say? Put you on the spot.
I would want them to know that it's not a choice to get in and it's not a choice to get out. Right? When I've got somebody that's on substances, when I've got somebody with a criminal record, when I've got an LGBTQ youth, and maybe all the programs I can find are faith-based, and that's just not going to work for them, right? There's all of these, or, you know, poverty becomes their pimp because they can't make their ends meet, and all of these things that we see happen, right? It's not a simple choice of, I'm going to go with the trafficker and I'm going to stay, or a simple choice of, I'm going to get out and I'm going to leave. It's a long-term process, and we have to have grace for each other and just know that we're trying and we're trying it together, and we'll figure it out. I mean, the people that are willing to do this work, and you have to take care of yourself to do the work. You cannot burn out, right? Yeah. But the people that are willing to do it and the people that are willing to receive the help are the most tenacious, resilient. They will make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say, you know, just one, even if it's just one person whose life you can change, you know, for the better. Even if you spend every day, you know, advocating, and, you know, many times you get calls in the middle of the night, you get Saturdays, Sundays, of course, you know, just 24/7, 365 days of the year. And sometimes it can be frustrating because you see people that don't make it, that do go back into the life, whether it was a choice or not. But sometimes we take that as a personal failure. Oh, I failed them, or look what happened. And you can't, because even if it is just one, it's worth it. It's worth you know, the frustration, the tears, you know, all of the emotions that come along with it. And so I'm just glad that there are those of us that aren't afraid to have this conversation. And want people to know, and we'll say the hard things for you, and we'll expose the truth, the dirty truth, but it's necessary. And so I thank you so much for spending your time, and I'm going to have you come back, because you and I are sitting here talking, and I'm taking notes, and I'm like, okay, next time she comes back, we're going to be talking about this, and this. And like I said, we could sit here for hours and we could talk about this, because we're both super passionate about it. But it really is conversations that need to be had, and we need to be talking about it and allowing people to know, you know, what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks again. You gonna come back? You better come back.
Yeah, I'll come back. I mean, I think in general, people want to be helpful. Sometimes they just need to be kind of guided how, and so we have to have the conversations, which we'll continue to do, and build up the helpers and get it going.
I think you're a wonderful human being. I am sorry that you had to be have me introduce you as a survivor advocate. I am sorry for that, but I believe that God has a plan for everyone, and for you to be doing what you're doing, and for you to be advocating for people that are walking in this, and for you to be going out and talking to mass amounts of law enforcement and people that need to know what's happening. I applaud you for that. I thank you for that, and I think that everybody listening and watching does too. So thanks. So again,
to be able to do it.
Yeah, thank you. And so if you or someone you know If you suspect in any way, shape, or form that you or anyone else is a victim of this type of exploitation, please call 911 when you are in a safe place to do so, or you can use the human trafficking hotline as a resource at 1-888-373-7888. Thanks so much for hanging for another episode, and we'll see you next time.